I want to look at this case study. It's very interesting to me for several reasons. But essentially, what happened is these researchers took a 2-year-old and they picked up Big Bird, a Big Bird toy, and said, let's meet Big Bird, which doesn't hold meaning to us, right? Let's meet Big Bird. But they didn't necessarily have a swing present, so an action could be performed. And so even without the swing, they were trying to see if they could just use this nonsense word and the child would still somehow know what they were trying to get at, even without a model. So they did not see the nonsense word meek paired with an action. Even so, later on they took a different toy and told them to meek it. The child looked around and found something that could move, that created action. So it's like they somehow knew a verb went there. And they went and they put that toy on there and used the swing to swing the new character, demonstrating they somehow understood that meek, they were using word meek to mean an action word like swing. The only thing the child did not have a model, right? The child did not have a prompt. It did not see the swing before being used. It's not like they put Big Bird on the swing and said, let's meek Big Bird and see if they could figure it out. They just handed the bird, Big Bird, and let's meek Big Bird. And later, but was very interactive, and the only thing the child had in that first interaction was joint attention, meaning they were the adult's full attention and the child was paying attention to the adult. And then the next time they used that word, the child guessed and knew what to do with it. It is crazy. I think it speaks volumes about the power of joint attention. Again, when I am working with a child, when a child has little to no language, without joint attention, it's very hard to teach them anything, including language. You see this in children with autism, where they almost seem to be in their own world, is the way people often describe it, but you can't get their attention. They don't want to share attention. They're not bringing a toy up to you to look at. They might not even respond when you call their name and make eye contact with you. But in this experiment, it showed the power of joint attention and learning language, because that's literally all that was present in that first prompt, in that first trial, and the child learned something. So it's an incredibly important skill, and it's incredibly important to language development, which is one reason that caregiver and child bond from the very beginning is really important, because when that caregiver and a child have that joint attention and that parent and child is speaking to that child, that's when so much of their language is growing. That's why the value and importance of a teacher and child relationship comes from. The same, whomever that person is, that child is sharing joint attention with, if we just even respond in imitations, repeating what they say, their vocab also goes up. They learn new words even though you're just repeating the same words back to them. It still helps their vocabulary grow. It's just mind-blowing to me. But that's what this case study was looking at and showed. And it says, you can try this. So I do encourage you to try it. I know many of you work with young children or in daycares. And it says, pair a toy with a nonsense word and do what these experimenters did. There doesn't have to be anything around that you're modeling it on. And then try it again later, or tell the child to go gob another toy and see if they do it. All right. I love research. I love studies like that. And again, you always look at things like that with a critical eye, because there are limitations to each research study individually. But just like what it could be implying, just the phenomenon that you see, it's just so incredibly fascinating. We can learn a lot. But I'll move on. Okay, I've kind of grouped several contemporary models together, because so far what we've discussed is rooted in a lot more research that has been conducted, for the most part on all of these models. It's because these are more recent in the final decades of the 20th century. And so there's more and more research all the time, but I haven't given as much time to them, but it doesn't make them less relevant. Okay, information processing model is trying to explain how learning takes place. And they basically took what we use for machine-based learning and tried to apply it. Do humans learn the same way we program machines to learn? So, meaning that if input enters the system, some initial processing takes place, and there's this new information, and then there's this old information in your long-term memory that's accessed in order to process the new information and then formulate a proper response. And that it's completely managed by your executive function, these executive processes of decision making that are under the influence, of course, of attention and emotion. So contributions of this is it did help formulate how we teach machine-based learning, but it's trying to explain all human learning, not just language learning, if we're talking about the information processing model. Limitations, of course, limited research. It doesn't account necessarily at all for social interaction. And then this idea of serial processing versus parallel processing. Serial processing means you learn each step in the sequence one at a time each step of the sequence, not necessarily you learning it, but each step of the sequence happens one at a time versus parallel processing where multiple steps co-occur. They all happen simultaneously, which is what's on this next slide. And honestly, most of human learning actually does occur through parallel processing. All right, here's an example. I want you to consider the graphic organizer of how they've tried to make sense of what this information processing model means. But the best way, more than this figure, is this example. Let's say you're walking down the street and you see something, and your immediate first thought is, oh, I see an animal. But you get closer. So as you get closer, you realize, oh, I can see better now, and you've also had time since then for your long-term memory to start filing through what are some animals I know. And you realize between seeing it and your memory, oh, that's a cat. So then you have this response. Your emotions tell you in that moment, oh, cats are pretty safe usually, and I don't need to really pay attention. I'll just kind of maybe scoot over on the sidewalk. But you get closer. So again, your vision gets better, and you realize, wait a second, I haven't ever seen cats with that color. And then you realize, oh, that cat's black with a white stripe down its back. And your long-term memory tells you that's not a cat, it's a skunk. All of a sudden, your attention instantly switches, right? And you're on full alert because your long-term memory tells you you do not want to be close to this. They're not safe. So your information processing speeds up. And you quickly change your response, to reflect what's happening in the situation. So even in that, you can see how you're constantly taking in new information and comparing it to old information, and that's how you're constantly processing. It's not static. It's not like a one-time thing. It's dynamic. It's constantly changing as your context changes. All right. The emergentist model, and we're almost done. Hang in there. I know it's a lot, but I think after this model, after this model, we're going to get a little bit into intervention and then be done. So hang with me. The emergentist model says that language is not innate, so directly contradicts the nativist model and kind of corresponds with the behavioral model because it's saying it has to be merged, but they are saying as an interaction of neural networks takes place. So it contrasts uniqueness of our human language through a language acquisition device and suggests that language emerges from interaction of social patterns in a cognitive system. It's anchored to the information processing model, meaning it came from that. And according to this model, there is no need to have a specific structure in the brain dedicated solely to language, which again directly contradicts what Chomsky was saying. It's that we have this device that's innate. And saying, no, I don't think it's needed, and here's why. Excuse me. It can help us understand, if this is true, it helps us understand how experience, biology, and social interaction can work together to help language learning. And the thing is that as we're able to do imaging and there's we can get increasing neurological evidence that large regions of the human brain are working together to accomplish complex tasks. That includes language processing. And so that would support this emergentist model that it's not a specific area of the brain that's necessarily responsible, because so many areas of the brain are firing simultaneously. Limitations, research. And then again, it doesn't necessarily account for social interaction, which is, I just experience tells me. So let's look now at this example. This emergence model says there are really three things that affect language. And so they would say, like starting in that left bottom corner, experience affects it, your changes in your brain affect it, and your cognitive development. That's what affects language. Much like we could look at a shoreline in that second example and say, a shoreline is not totally controlled by human construction or an ocean current or weather patterns. You can't separate them. They all contribute to the shoreline being created. And they're saying we can't possibly say it's just one thing that's contributing to language. There's multiple things happening. And if you don't want to believe them for any other reason, they're taking these neural images and saying, then why are different areas of the brain firing? Okay, we made it.